Good afternoon. Welcome back to another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. You are tuned into publishing books as a fine art photographer, hosted by SanDisk, or publishing books for the struggling street photographer masquerading as an event space host. RJ, Pete, what's going on, guys? Look, I told us before we went live, I'm going to be paying attention to this one because look, everybody wants to get their work in print, take something beyond just the digital medium. And RJ is going to help usher us into that world today. As you guys know, we've had RJ on. He's becoming a fixture here, and he's out there doing it for real. So RJ, we appreciate you and your expertise that you bring here. Pete, obviously, you bring us the best. We always have like the cool.
And I love having RJ here. He speaks so well to how to actually use our products and the benefits of them within a workflow, and not just, hey, this is the spec of the product and this is what it does. So, he's a great ambassador in that sense.
Yeah, been using your stuff for a long time. Media, 20 years plus. So good stuff. Yeah. Well, thank you, Derek and Pete, for your support. Excited to be here. Excited to share. I'm a big fan of this notion of a sharing, and a rising tide raises all ships. And I like to start off saying, there's no secrets in the fine art photography world. It's just those things that people don't share. And what I'm going to share with you today is something that's very near and dear to my heart as a photographer. It's a very publishing books. It's as close as I will ever come to like birthing a child, I will say. It's like 9 months of a lot of hard work, right? And so we're going to get into the nitty gritty. I've got a little presentation I'm going to share. So here we are in play mode. Let's just go in here. All right, so everyone, we're all ready to go on board. I'm going to try to keep questions. We'll answer them at the end of the presentation. But here we go. Publishing books as a fine art photographer. And I want to just give you a quick intro. I am a fine art photographer. I've been just published my second book, a monograph of my work in 2021, which is accompanied by a touring exhibition, which I'm excited about. I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we are just excited to be here. So here we go. I want to give a big old special thanks to B&H Photo Video and their wonderful event space opportunity to stream to you live with Q&A. I'll definitely make sure we have time at the end, 10 minutes to answer. And of course, Pete at SanDisk for his support, financial support of this opportunity. I work with two wonderful galleries, the Veronique Wantz Gallery in Minneapolis and Olson Larson Galleries in Iowa. So I want to give a big special thanks to them. And since we're talking about books, I've been very fortunate to work with two wonderful publishers that I would highly recommend. MW Editions, they're in Brooklyn, New York, and Kara Verlag, they're based in Heidelberg, Germany. So a little roadmap of where we're going to go today in the next 50 minutes. Publishing books is a little outline I want to show. We're going to talk about the importance of not just being different, because a lot of creatives want to be different. And then what ends up happening is they all look the same. And so what I want to emphasize is how to be differenter, okay? And to stand out, to have this unique shtick. And I've talked about this in a couple of my previous B&H talks. So you might want to listen back on that. But I'm going to give you a little run through of how I started publishing books. I would call them self-published books, but they actually did not come in the form of the fine art genre, but were more from my wedding photography business. So the importance of wedding albums and this notion of how do you create a story, visual story from start to finish. We'll then delve into talking about your book and how that could help your career. And some of the potential outcomes that you might expect, as well as this journey of finding a publisher. There's also a host of other ways to get your book out in the world where you don't need a print publisher. You can self-publish, and I'll talk a little bit about that. When to self-publish, and how do you finance a book project, which is kind of the biggest obstacle in terms of putting a book out there in the world because of the cost of goods and production and labor. And so we'll kind of talk about things that I've done that I found successful, and what might work for me may not work for you. However, I'm going to share this stuff that isn't necessarily taught in an MFA program. And then finally, how do you make money selling books of your work? And I hope to perk up a couple ears in that presentation. So this notion of being different is really important, because you want to be remembered as, oh yeah, that's the photographer that did this or this, right? And it becomes almost a part of your stylistic brand. And that's not to say that that can't shift over time, but you want to have this almost like this shtick, as you call it. Like, you are the expert in blank. Could be, I don't know, underwater photography, like David Duboulet at National Geographic, or People of New York, right? The portraits series of just ordinary people. Just two examples where that they stand out as like being very different. You wouldn't contrast, like send an underwater photographer expert on the streets of New York for portraiture, right? Or vice versa. So photographers do have this shtick, and this notion of, I think, authenticity and really kind of paying attention to yourself and like what you're genuinely interested in, and kind of filtering out the rest of the world, what everyone else is doing. Don't worry about that. Kind of focus in on what fires you up, like makes you enthusiastic. So I wanted to step back into time, into 2006, when I started my photography business. And this was a screen grab. This was my website at the time. Kern Photo, fresh, modern, fun was my tagline. And I wanted something that was very different, different from the traditional landscape of wedding photography, where I wanted to really embrace kind of the quirkiness of couples. I could use my energy and creativity. This was a test shoot that was actually turned then into a bridal portrait inspired by the movie Inception, when the walls were calling up. And so not your traditional bride and groom wedding day portrait. And I like to think these types of images almost serve like a gatekeeper, where if someone were to land on my homepage and see this type of work, they're either going to like it or they're going to hate it. Kind of like a Quentin Tarantino model in the film business. And that's okay. Like, it's okay that you don't have to appeal to everyone. You want to appeal to your audience. And so these kind of gatekeeper images that you're like, oh, wow, that looks good. Oh, wow. And you dive a little bit deeper, and there's certain things in a particular image that might catch you off guard or be a little different. That's a good thing, I argue. These are some of my creative portraits I created on the wedding day, inspired by, backing up here, this is more like a Downton Abbey inspired portrait. This is actually at Larchmont Yacht Club, not too far outside of New York. And you can see there's some light painting involved on the globe, kind of gives a little electricity, a little bit something that's different. A Phantom of the Opera inspired bride and groom with like the mask, and gives them kind of this elusive visual, like, what is that? That's something that I haven't seen before in this particular genre. So this is a fun one. I'm like, yeah, why wouldn't you bring out a Darth Vader mask and, have candles lit suspended from the sky? Like, people will sometimes remember that. And so when I began my photography business, having good images, I felt like were really important, like good compositions, good moment, good lighting. Those are like kind of my three variables for what makes an effective photograph. And then the books became a way in my business that someone can hold a tangible object that isn't a digital, isn't an iPad, isn't a phone. And there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's something that grandma can hold in her hand. It's a keepsake, right? I know a lot of my clients, I tell them, hey, if there's ever a fire at your house, I know you would probably run in and grab your wedding album. That's okay. I can reprint it. It's okay. But that heirloom quality is what I felt like was really important in that I was creating meaningful work. Now you would to contrast maybe that to like a commercial campaign of photography where you maybe be photographing the latest car model and the company's paying you well, but then the next year the car model has changed and really no one cares about those images from last year because they're on to the next thing, right? I wanted in my personal fine art photography to create something that was a little bit more meaningful with deeper roots, projects that potentially have the ability to kind of transcend time, that we would look back almost like it's a time capsule. But I took into account the quality of details in what I like to, be proud to sign in a book that speak to quality of craftsmanship, presentation, a tight edit, right? Where there's only the best of the best images that make it into an album. Here's an album that was inspired by a room and board piece of furniture that they knew they wanted to display their wedding album in this brown leather on this particular coffee table. So we matched the leather to match the walnut drawers and chest. To give you an idea of the importance of how I would like a book of photographs to be remembered. And keep in mind, this is all from a wedding photographer's perspective. And then I carry that into my own fine art work as well, which begs that question of how important is publishing a book for a fine art career? And I'll just answer this saying, it's as important as you make it, if that makes sense. I like to think that a book serves as like a catalog for a well-conceived project that is tightly edited. There is no special number of images that will make a book. I think, images that are in the range of, say, maybe 40 to 70, something like that, make a volume that makes sense to have in a book form. Of course, artist books can come in very much different ways. And I love the book arts tradition. I mean, gosh, you can have a codex. You could have an artist book that's on a slab of metal, right? So there's a lot of different notions of what a book is. I've created a virtual book, which is more like this virtual choose your own experience. That information is on my website called The Best of the Best Virtual Artist Book. But in terms of launching a completed project that's been fully conceived, I like to say fully baked, right? That's not half baked. I think the book is an effective and highly democratic way of getting your work out in the world. And the best example I like to share with that is when you're at the library, and let's just say you're going to go look at street photography. And I know we have a lot of street photographers here, and you might see the likes of people like Elliot Erwitt, right? And you're walking down the library with your head cocked, looking at all the different titles of street, photojournalism, maybe the Magnum photographers there. But it's often interesting on the library shelves or the bookstore shelves of what other books are next to it that you might not discover. And then you see it, and you're like, oh, I've never heard of this photographer. And you say, oh, who's this Stephen Shore person or Joel Meyerowitz? Oh, I've never heard of this person. And then you're like, whoa, this work has been created in the 1980s, or is the pioneer of color photography, right? So that's one of the values of introducing projects for a longevity, right? This is kind of your legacy to think about, like, from here to kingdom come, you have time to share completed projects. So this was my first completed project, my book called The Sheep and the Goats. And this came out in 2018. And it was formed by, if you're not familiar with the project, kind of a retracing of some of my ancestral heritage in Norway, Iceland, Ireland, and Germany, looking at these very common animals, sheep and goats. And yet we approached the design of the book a little different than the traditional photo book, in that the book was designed in half. So that the beginning of the book started in the middle, and it was divided in half. So the sheep were on the left and the goats were on the right, which follows a parable in the Bible, the parable of the sheep and the goats. And so that was it. I wanted to kind of take a very traditional subject, inspired by European landscape painting in terms of composition and light, and design a book that was outside the box. And we did pretty well with that. Won some design awards and sold prints. But I looked at that first book as a catalyst for my career because it was essentially 5 years of work to create this body of work called kind of two parts, the divine animals, the bovidae, and then Out to Pasture, where I photographed the goats that did not win at the county fairs. And that was published in National Geographic, including this image here, named after one of my favorite movies, Dumb and Dumber. Now, the outcomes of publishing a book are varied, and my experience may not be what might happen to you. So I'm going to talk briefly about both positive and the negative components of publishing a photo book. This is a portfolio walk at the Portland Art Museum and at Photo Lucida, which is a biannual portfolio review for fine art photographers in Portland, Oregon. And what's interesting, that a lot of these are my colleagues and aficionados of fine art photography, and you could see, it represents a considerable effort to create a good photograph, then to create a series of good photographs, then to show that series on a table with people you've never met before. And this is open to the public. And I love going there and seeing projects other photographers have been working on, maybe the new, the fresh, the different. But what's interesting is when you go to the highest level, I think, of kind of emerging fine art photographers, which I might be, some of these audiences that are listening in here today, you get to a point where like everyone's got a good image or a good set of images. 10 images, for example, for Critical Mass Top 50 is a competitive contest, a visual fine art photography photojournalism contest where only 10 images are judged. And it's fairly, like at this point, there's 50 people every year that are winning these awards. So as a photography aficionado myself, I love to collect photographs, display them behind me, like on my wall. However, if there's a photographer who's got a completed project, that's one thing. If there's a photographer that has a completed project that's selling prints, that has a monograph as well to support that project, that's even better. And it's one thing to have like a $400 or $500 print available, but when that photograph is published in a book, and that book might only be $40, I feel like that book gives a tremendous amount of value to the project. And so it's so nice, like when you frame the image on your wall and then you got, friends over and, hey, tell me more about this work, right? You can go to the shelf, the bookshelf, pick it up, and yep, here's the rest of the work, well conceived. There's essays written in the book about the work, or the artist is writing about the work. And I think at portfolio reviews, it was very clear to me to be a standout, having a book was a distinct advantage. That $40 book created a lot of additional value for me, making decisions on if I wanted to buy a piece of work or buy a print from an artist and help an artist support that. Knowing that the artist has gone to that level of effort, invested in their own career, was really important for me. Like, hey, how serious are they about their projects? So that's from more of like a collector side. And I wanted to share that experience with you, is that demonstrated commitment to your project. Now, you might ask yourself, okay, I am so committed. I want to publish my book. I'm on board. I'm ready to go. How do I find a publisher? There's so many publishers out there, I will say. Going to portfolio reviews is one great project, one activity to connect with publicists that can or book agents that can maybe introduce you to publishers. You could also maybe find some of your favorite photo books and, go to worldcat.org. This kind of the library of librarians, and type in the author and see what other books that they've been published in. who published them and where they are in the world, right? Oh my gosh, I typed in, for example, The Unchosen Ones, which is my second book. And I can see that Columbia University, NYU, the New York Public Library System has my book on their shelves that anyone can view. And so that's one of the advantages of working with a publisher that has distribution, because these are networks that I don't have access to necessarily, but are really important that the libraries will be buying books every quarter, right? When the catalogs come out from the publishers, they will buy those books and put them in the library. So that opens up a huge world of audience for your projects. Now, if you don't have the opportunity to connect with a publisher, try, I will say that for sure. Self-publishing is certainly an option. And what do I mean by self-publishing is you can buy an ISBN number. Heck, you don't need one. But artist books are often produced in limited editions, edition of 10, edition of 50, for example, that aren't necessarily, a trade edition run of, say, 1,500 or 3,000, right? So when to self-publish, the answer to that, I feel like, is when you feel like your project's at this kind of momentum where it makes sense. And when I began this project, The Unchosen Ones, in 2016, I photographed 65 youth at county fairs, and these youth did not win their animal contest, and they're portraits of the defeated, if you will. I wanted to have a project that seemed that I could get out in the world. And so I produced a limited edition. This is a clamshell box. I did a purple rosette ribbon that was on top of the portfolio case that had a signed 11 by 14 inch print. And then there was a unbound self-published book that was essentially, you could take it apart. And so imagine if you're a parent or a family or loved one of these kids that I photographed, maybe you wanted your favorite to be first or your best for last. And so the book can be edited and sequenced in any way. There were no page numbers on the book. Originally, as the book is shipped, the portraits appear alphabetical. But I wanted to produce a book fairly nimbly because I had this touring exhibition back out to the county fairs where I created the work. And you can see here, this was 2 years later when I originally created the work. I went back out to where this is at the Anoka County Fair. And there is Kenzie. She's the gal with the goat in the banner display, and her friend Tate as well. They were both participants in the project. And I gave them this self-published book, which cost me about $35. I produced 100 of them. And so it was a $3,500 outlay, which helped me at this point just to say thank you to the kids, where it was better than just a digital image, but it was like this completed project. There was essays in the book. And I didn't realize at the time, but that was a really smart investment because it forged those, like kind of cemented the relationship between all of these different kids that then I would re-photograph 4 years later, right? That passage of time, seeing how the animals have changed, that growth from defeat, from not winning, right? And some of the kids maybe went on to win. And so had I not done a self-published book, the trade edition would not have been maybe as successful because I would not have been able to reach out and re-photograph, 50 of the kids 4 years later. Here's another kid, Riley, with her mom at the county fair in Barnesville, Minnesota. I reconnected here with Bryce and Nathan, who are pictured behind there on the little touring exhibition. And I asked him, the name some of these kids give their sheep is pretty funny. I said, how are Freaky Freddy and Skittles? And they looked at each other like they're both in our freezer because they use these animals. So it was really funny to see, how these kids have evolved and progressed over the years. So that's where kind of a self published project made sense for me, where I thought the project was done, but then I wanted to put something out in the world sooner than later. And I didn't want to go through the process of like a finished monograph, this is what actually became the book that was published in 2021, the Chosen One. So there's kind of a little overview of the self-publishing world. Now you might ask yourself, gosh, how do I finance a book project? I mean, $3,500 is like a really nice lens. $35,000 is a complete different deal. And that's in general the starting kind of point for publishing a book with a publisher. So I wanted to share some of the different revenue streams that help me to pay kind of for a monograph. I've given a series of talks through the 4-H and that they pay, as well as some teaching some workshops. What was most beneficial was a series of traveling exhibitions, and I blocked them out just because I didn't want specific numbers about locations shared. But you can see where venues are paying me to exhibit work, where I ship them the work and then there's programming involved. So anywhere from like $1,750 to up to $8,000 is being paid to exhibit work. And this is an opportunity to engage audiences in a way that are really invested in the subject matter that I'm exploring. So in this case, it's youth, it's agriculture, right? This audience is way bigger than the audience that might be interested in me as a fine art photographer exploring a particular issue. I've also given book talks and some commissions and some sponsorships. But I wanted to show with you here that number 109, it's in green. And you might ask yourself, RJ, what's that 109 about? And if you were to guess, you might think, I don't know, number of images sold or for $6,605. No, that 109 represents within the first 12 months of the book coming out, I was able to sell 109 books to the cost of $6,600. So right away, you can see how there's not a lot of money to be made in books. However, it's the sponsorships, it's exhibitions, it's all part of multiple pillars of revenue streams that help support this project and a touring project. So that's kind of sobering, thinking, gosh, I mean, it's almost like you're paying $100 to sell something for 50 as a loss leader, right? But in this case, it makes sense. And so now that number has changed significantly in the last year as more books sell and that sort of thing. But the deluxe edition too brought in $5,000, and I have a photo of what that looks like coming up. And then I received some grants as well to help support the project. So in sum, while I might have paid $45,000 for a book project, the revenue is up to $133,000. So there is money to be made in producing books. And that's a wonderful segue into the question is, how do you make money selling books? And I've got this this bag here I received from Perry Photo. It's by the Deadbeat Club, which is a publisher in California. And they gave me this bag, and I share this bag because he says there's no money in books on the tote bag. And I scratched my head. I was like, no. That's not right. There's a lot of money in books. It's hard to get the money out of the book, right? Because you invest a lot of money in that book. So that was kind of a fun thing. But in general, it is an investment in your career, in a well-conceived project. It's the most expensive business card you'll ever have for your fine art photography business. So I think special editions and prints are what help to drive sales to pay for books, right? So it's not, as I mentioned, these books can be loss leaders. And that's okay, because if someone buys a $1,000 print, I can give them a book, and then it makes complete sense. And the profit margin on that is way bigger, or they wanted to give, pay me for an exhibition where there isn't a lot of cost of goods involved if the show's been already produced. It's essentially my time. And then it's, of course, the intellectual property, right? It's almost like a licensing deal. And that's where the value comes into play, where you do the hard work up front. And then because that project has deep roots, it continues on. So what do special editions might look like? Well, my first book here, The Sheep and the Goats, this is the collector's edition. I think I might have 3 left on my website. But they started, I think, at $300, and I raised the price incrementally as it sold out to $625 now. And you open that up, and there's the monograph. It's signed. It has a print. It has the National Geographic in it. And then I collaborated with a Norwegian textiles artist named Karen to do this thing called skin fell, which is the rarest form of Norwegian art. So kind of woodblock printing. The sheep on the right, the goats on the left, right? There's the Nat Geo. We did a bookmark as well with the fiber from animals that I had photographed. So the animals were, the wool was shaved before they died. So these animals both have passed away. But I did a lot of research when I started kind of figuring out, okay, what is this collector's edition going to look like? So a couple examples is Barbara Bosworth or Rebecca Norris Webb. I kind of did some Googling and I said, okay, they're selling their limited edition book for $125 and $250. Well, what does it come with? What size print might it come with? How's that print ship? Is it a handmade folio? Is it just the print going to be in the book? And then like if there are different types of books or tiers, like in this case, Barbara Bosworth has this edition of 30 deluxe edition for $1,200, which has, 3 handmade letterpress booklets. Rebecca Norris Webb for her deluxe edition was $400, which includes 2 prints, and they sold out. And there is a market, fine art photographer, collector market, because like they can still have a print that's been signed that they don't necessarily have to frame. Framing is expensive and there's limited wall space, but they can still support the artist in that way. And so I think doing your research, you start realizing, oh, okay, there's these niches about Janelle Lynch did this book, Another Way of Looking at Love, priced a little higher at $4,000, edition of 3 for a special edition. And then the deluxe edition of 20. Lisa McCarty, Transcendental Concord. This is all, by the way, on the Radius website, Radius Books. They're based in Santa Fe. And David Chicky's the designers of very talented designer, and they put out some wonderful books. But so I would say, in this research, looking at publishers like Radius, what are their authors, their artists, their photographers doing? Where are the price points starting at for the trade edition, for the limited edition, if there's a deluxe edition? And so there's always these cost of goods that go involved. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, okay, what could this look like for you? And using kind of myself as a case study. So I fully embraced the book arts tradition. This is my studio. It's kind of in my garage basement area where I've got, you can see book art cloth, book cloth that I've bought. This denim blue cloth that kind of matches the jeans that the kids would wear. And you can see the archival book board there on the table. I've got all my supplies. These are the tools of a book artist, right? For cutting and gluing and creating these folios by hand, which is what I do. And I enjoy the kind of methodical approach, but know that, when I produce my trade edition book, I also created, I believe I had 70 copies I ordered of a special edition with denim cloth. And then I ordered more of that blue denim cloth. Then to produce the collector's edition of the Unchosen One, which features 2 photographs. This is a little, let me see, I'm going to forward here. Yeah, so that's what the finished product looks like there. And then you can see the embossing on the end of the book. It's a special treatment. Here we go. So you can see kind of two archival pigment prints. One on the left was taken in 2016. The one on the right was taken in 2020. And these are how they appear in the book as well. Riley and Nellie at the Clay County Fair in 2016. Riley and Nellie at the Clay County in 2020. So if I back up here, this is kind of a geeky little thing, is when a book is published, they use oftentimes, if I open up the slipcover here, this is the inside of the book, if you can see it here. They use these like embossing machines with, sometimes they might be made of magnesium, otherwise times they're made of brass. And those die are what they stamp with pressure. And this is my big tip, is see if you can have the publisher save that die stamp and ship it to you once the book has been done, because then you can do all sorts of other things with that die to make like little special artist editions, or in my case, the deluxe edition where I handmade that denim collector's edition folio using the same die that was used on the book. These would normally run you $400. So you could save that because you've already paid for that when you produce the book. So that's a lot of things like you wouldn't think about. The publisher would just toss that when they're done. But as the artist, it's like, hey, that has value, right? And so you take this kind of copper foils to the right there, and I use a hot foil machine, which you can get a lot of book art stores. I borrow one. I can rent a space out in the Minnesota Center for Book Arts, and I bring my cast die and my that little foil stamp is like $3, and then I make my denim folios, and then I can stamp on my own whatever size shape I want. In this case, I think these are little portfolio review leave behinds that I've made. And what was nice is there's that consistency between the book above, which I did not create that embossing. That was done at the publishing house or by the publisher, but that at least the materials matched. And so for my special edition, I had a couple different options and kind of upgrade. This is the blue denim book that we're talking about here. Is they do cost extra, so above and beyond the normal trade edition, but I feel like by producing a special edition helps bring in additional revenue. So if I wanted 35 copies and I wanted a photo that was tipped in on the front and the back, it was $1,500 plus shipping. And you'll notice how expensive shipping is, because these books have to basically ship on a pallet from overseas. And that's a cost you can't escape. And I think a lot of, especially with international shipping, there's customs and all of that you have to go through. But if you can kind of price it out yourself, okay, well, if I want to save $200 just to tip in on the front, okay, $1,300, right? But then the costs go down if I got 75 copies or 115 copies. And to me, the formula that made the most sense, and you'll notice the shipping, you get twice as many copies, and the shipping actually is more than double, because they can't just be in normal boxes, but they have to go on a pallet, right? So there are these variables that you have to be thinking about. Okay, what's all this going to cost? And so doing research and getting quotes and giving yourself a budget, I think, is really important. And that's what the final book looks like. It's available on my website. Again, it kind of features these kids that did not win at Minnesota County Fairs over the period of 4 years. And then I wrote this grant to help me produce the deluxe edition, which had that special denim, but this was actually my work sample, my mock-up, that I had like the denim cloth book, and then it would go inside the clamshell box in the book well, and then there would be prints on top. And so I was like, I wrote a grant to do something like this. I didn't get the grant. I ended up doing it anyway. And it was smart. It really helped out. So this is what a completed folio looks like. You can see there's that branding consistency between the special edition monograph and the folio. And then my cost of goods for each one of these, because I'm assembling these by hand, is relatively nominal. I would say the prints are maybe cost of goods $15 a piece for the print. And then the plastic, and then the denim, I had to buy that big roll that you saw in the previous photo. I think it was like $700 or $800. But then there's tons of fabric that I could then break apart and move. So maybe cost of goods for bookboard and cloth might be $6, $8, $10. So then you're like under $50, hand make your time and energy to then sell it for like $550. So the profit there is $500, which is you sell 30 of them, you're like, oh, there's $15,000 if I did my math right? 30 times 500, yeah. I produce both portraits, so verticals, or choice, they could choose any 2 images in the book. In these cases were the horizontals. And that was very different than I think a lot of other photographers that do special editions. Generally, they choose 1 or 2 prints, but this notion of choosing was important. And so giving people the choice to choose their favorite images that they would like in the collector's edition were important. Keep in mind, they're all edition of 10. So not once edition of 10 is gone, then that image is sold out for the collector's edition. But this was the completed deluxe edition, and this is edition of 12. It's essentially a portfolio in a box. Open it up, and there's an accordion book with QR codes. There's the special bound monograph. There are 12 12 prints. You'll see there's a little thumbnail. There's a Colophon page as well. It has information, and then the prints are all individually signed. So that's kind of like the completed format of the project with some like little details as well. So again, this is a $5,000 book project that, again, you don't have to sell many of those to then begin to help pay for the book. And maybe you do it at the front end of the project, maybe you do it at the end of a project. But there's value to this. And there's special collections and libraries that do like to collect this sort of object that's been handmade by the artist and well conceived. I have a printed prospectus that I also created. There's a PDF that's online that has that information, but this is an important marketing tool for a $5,000 artist book, because they want the who, what, when, why, where, how of the book. And so there's lots of information, everything, the number of photographs, the number of pages, the size, the ISBN, who printed it, all of that, so that if a librarian receives this, they know exactly, they can copy and paste the text into their catalog, right? Now, this Colophon, this information that has that who, what, when, why, where, how, can exist in many different formats. So I wanted to show you, this is my Colophon for the deluxe edition. I keep it in sentence formats. This deluxe edition debuted at the Artist Third Solo Exhibition with Burnett Fine Art Advisory in Wayzata, Minnesota. There's the 2022's edition of 12 plus AP, artist proof. So I say exactly what's in it. And then this is edition, and then I would handwrite number 1 of 12 or 2 of 12 in that space. This is a Colophon that I created for the Best of the Best, which is an accordion book featuring salt prints and salt print pop-ups. Again, I kind of have all that who, what, when, why, where, how in that. And then I sign, this is copy, 3 of 12 or something like that. Harriet Bart is a photographer that lives in Minneapolis. And I went to the Walker Art Center in Minnesota. And I pay close attention to what other book artists are doing in their colophons. How do they describe their work? One thing I saw that was interesting is she has 25 copies. They're each press numbered 1 to 25, but there's a pre-publication price of $12.50. And then after publication, so after, in this case, March 31st of 2001, so this was 22 years ago, the price went up. right? To 15. So that kind of encourages collectors to pre-buy before it helps. That helps with cash flow as the artist is paying for the cost of goods and the collaborators as well. So I think, that's right it. We are kind of right at time for my presentation here on publishing books as a fine art photographer. And at this point, we'll stop sharing. And if there's questions the audience has, now is the time.
RJ, it looks like there's one question in the Q&A there. Can you access that, or or should I read it for you?
Go ahead and read it. Yeah, if you could read it, that'd be great. I clicked on it, but it's truncated for somehow.
No worries. Jim has asked, how does publishing your own book affect your relationship with galleries?
Galleries really like to kind of coordinate the launch of an exhibition with the publication of a monograph. I think it helps from a sales perspective. More importantly, I think if an exhibition can be timed with a publication, then when the book is published, right, there's publicity about the book. Maybe you get an article in the New York Times or write-up in Art Review, right? So people are excited about the book and they want to see the work, and then they go to the exhibition. So that's kind of the idea, right? And it's hard to do that because of you're planning a book out, hopefully 18 months out, right? If you have a gallery that's going to show the work, and then you're kind of back reverse engineering your schedule so that, okay, when are proofs due by? When's the final book due by? When's it going to be printed? When's it going to be shipped? When's it going to be received, right? All of that in time for the exhibition. So there's a lot of logistics and planning and organizing to make that happen. But then when people show up at the gallery to see a show, they may not have money to acquire a print per se, but then maybe they can still get a signed book at the reception for $50, right? That's still kind of a piece of the project, a piece of the artist. And I feel like that's a really kind of nice way to build a little collection of photo books that without breaking the bank, so to speak. So, yeah.
Great. And Jim also asks if you could talk about cover art.
Cover art. Okay. Cover art. It's, the book is judged by the cover. And it's the first impression people make when they see a book on the shelf, especially if there's other books next to it on the shelf. I feel like it's subjective on the content. Because this was a book about portraits, it felt right to have a portrait on the cover. I know a lot of books that are just text on the cover. Maybe just a photo without text on the cover. So it's really an artistic decision of the image. I feel like it should speak about the project as a whole. I do remember Alex Soth had a Magnum workshop, and he talked a little bit about Sleeping by the Mississippi, which was kind of the photo book that really launched, I think, a different way of thinking about how does a photographer produce a monograph, and that it wasn't just the way it was designed and shot. It was very methodical. It was landscape, portrait, detail, which at that point kind of breaks across a lot of genres of photography. And he had mentioned, he's like, the moment that first edition book came out, there was a portrait on the cover, and it was his first project, major project. And he kicked himself. He said, because then people saw a person on the cover, and then they automatically thought he was a portrait photographer. And he's like, no. He's not just a portrait photographer. He does landscapes. He does details, right? He's an artist, right? So it can work against you if, so then I think the second and the third edition, they chose a detail image on the cover, which I don't know if it did as well. But it was interesting how a cover choice of the artwork can define what people think of the artist, right? So it is an important decision, right? And when you work with a publisher, keep in mind, you are actually especially if they have a distributor that has business ties to, the distributor will often have a say in the design, in the cover treatment of the book, because covers sell, right? And they're a business. They're there to sell books, and people will often, librarians, for example, they will make their ordering decisions online without even seeing a tangible book, right? Before flipping through the pages, they will have like a preview of a few of the images. They'll have a text description, and they'll have all the specifics about the book, you know, the number of pages, the plates, the size, that sort of thing. So in that case, it's a business decision as to what image, the artwork, goes on the cover of the book. For my first book here, I wanted to make sure that there was a photograph that was indicative of the project, but also allow the designer time for the text that's embossed on the cover, and that it seemed to make sense visually, both front and, in this case, back. You know, the colors are very consistent from front to back, even though they're two different photographs. And the tonality is similar, and so it made it like something that you wanted to pick up, like, oh, you know, that I could be interested in this, right? So good question. Thank you for asking. Yeah.
I think that was all the questions we got.
Okay.
So, thank you. Thanks for being here. This was a great
yeah. No, this was wonderful. If folks have any questions, other questions outside of this, you know, my website is rjkern.com. I offer mentoring, little workshops as well for photographers kind of finding their way in this wacky world, uncertainty world of photography, and especially with fine art. So, yeah. Well, thank you, Pete, for hosting, sponsoring this, Derek for hosting. I appreciate it immensely. And that's it for me.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.